second lesson on retrieval failure, where I'm going to focus more on state-dependent forgetting. So this is a follow-up to the previous session, which was lesson 10. So cue-dependent forgetting. Cues, just to recap, are things that serve as a reminder. So it could be a room, an environment, or it could be a mental state, so being sad. Two types of cues: context-dependent cues and state-dependent cues. The focus of this short session is just to recap over state-dependent forgetting. So state-dependent forgetting is the mental state that you were in at the time of learning, can also act as a cue. And for this, we're going to focus on the study by Goodwin. It's quite an old study. I have talked about it in a previous video, but I just want to make sure that everybody's okay with this. So, is recall better when the learning state is present? So in other words, if the mental or emotional state for recall is the same as when we learnt, will we recall better? So just like the previous video, I've tried to put it into visual form. So in condition 1, if we just have a look here, if you are taught information when you're drunk and you recall it when you're drunk, how are you going to remember? Condition 2, sober and recall sober. Condition 3, learn while you're drunk and recall when you're sober. And condition 4, learn when you're sober and recall when you're drunk. Nice visual image just to try to think about what those 4 different conditions are. So this time we've got 48 male medical students. They're asked to remember a list of words when they're either sober or drunk. There are other tasks as well involved in this. I did discuss that in the other video. Different to Godden and Badley study because they're actually asked to do more tasks. So if we just move on, just have a look, and again these are basic results, but really in my opinion for AQA this is all you would need, as long as you're aware roughly what the results show. So what we can see here is if you are if you're sober at learning and you recall at learning, we can see that the bar is quite high here, so the same state. But if you're sober at learning, obviously, and drunk at recall, the learning isn't as good. So what do the results suggest? They clearly suggest that the state in which we learn and the state in which we recall must be the same to maximise performance. We can conclude that state does act as a cue. So we really do need to be in the same state to recall something as we've learnt it. It might be if you get upset and you're crying that it starts to bring back previous memories, previous unhappy memories. Again, that could be an example, if you like, of state-dependent remembering. Just the same way as we did in the previous lesson, think about the way in which you could evaluate this. So one of the problems with this is it is a lab experiment. So in terms of mundane realism, the task is not something that you would generally be asked to do in everyday life. Although going in and out of intoxicated states is something that does happen in everyday life, but the setting, which was in a controlled environment, is not realistic. We've also got potential problems with the participants. We've got 48, which although is quite a good number for an experiment, it'd be very difficult to generalise the whole population, but we've got medical students, and the problem there is we've got people who are used to learning, and people, if you like, who are used to being tested and put into those conditions. And that could perhaps lead to demand characteristics, particularly if they're used to being part of experiments. There's the study again, just to recap. Please ensure that you know this study. So a cue is a trigger which allows us to access a memory. Some cues can be meaningful as they are often learnt in a particular situation, place, then easier to recall when in that place again. These are some of the questions that you might find in the Green Herd Girl book. And there is, I think, a scenario in there where it talks about, it's part of the application questions, about a Viking town. And if you have a look at this, have a look at the question in the booklet, in the textbook, This should be able to help you answer that, because if you learn something in a particular place, it should be easier to recall. So here are some questions that you can carry out just to help yourself with this. Explain retrieval failure as an explanation for forgetting. So obviously you could use state and context dependent there in part of your answer. In the context of forgetting, what is meant by a cue? Use an example. Describe a study for context dependent forgetting, which would be Godden and Badley. Describe a study for state dependent forgetting, which would be the one that we've just looked at today. This is the apply it question I was referring to, and there is some guidance in this PowerPoint for how to answer that. It is in the Green Herd Girl book. If you need a copy of that, not the book, but the apply it question, please let me know and I will upload it onto here. Again, if you've got any queries, you should find retrieval failure and retrieval cues much easier than interference theory. The research is more memorable, and you should find it a little bit easier.